The Chicago Bulls got no draft lottery luck last night, and they still will be picking at number 11. But that does not mean that the Bulls still don't have prospects that can definitely help them at positions of need. On today's episode, we're going to focus mainly on the center position for the Chicago Bulls in this upcoming draft as we start our draft coverage. We're going to get into all that. Plus, why if the Bulls do not draft a center, it's not necessarily the worst thing either. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content. So we're going to start our draft coverage, and we're going to start with the position that most Bulls fans are hoping that the Bulls do address in this draft, and that is the center position. We know that the center position is one of the positions not only that we've been the thinnest at over the last few years, but also we have an aging center, Nikola Vucevic, that while still can be productive, and I talked about on yesterday's episode just how good Vuce still is in wins, averaging almost 19 and a half points, almost 11 rebounds, a steal and a block per game in the Bulls wins. Vuce is still a player that, if utilized correctly and he stops shooting so many threes, can still be an effective player, but it's clear that it's time to start preparing for the future at the center position. On top of Vuce's limitations defensively that we have, Andre Drummond being an unrestricted free agent, maybe he's going to get more than what the Bulls can offer him with how close they are to the luxury tax next year. So center is one of the positions that most people are kind of focused on what the Bulls are going to do this offseason with. So that's also where we're going to start our draft coverage with. I have 5 prospects here at the center position that we're going to cover on today's episode. It does not mean we're not going to look at some other center positions. And one player on this is a power forward with maybe some center upside. So I kind of cheated a little bit on that one. He'll be on both lists. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first player that I want to talk about is Donovan Clingan. And Clingan is a player that he brings the length, he brings the size, he brings more fluidity in how he guards than a prospect like Zack Edey, who we'll also cover on this episode as well. Hard to move defensively and offensively. When you look at his frame as well, if he can add about another 10 pounds of muscle on top of that, you're looking at a guy who's going to be one of the strongest centers in the league at 7'2", 280 pounds already, but you can tell that he can still add some to that frame. 13 points per game last season in college, 7 rebounds, 1.5 assists, shot the ball 63% from the field. Did he last year in his sophomore year in college as well? Only shot the three ball 25%, but he didn't take a whole hell of a lot of threes. Less than 1 3 per game average there. So he doesn't take threes. He understands his limitations. Some of the biggest strengths about a player like Donovan Clingan is his interior defense and rim protection. He's going to have some of the best interior defense in the entire draft class, both on ball and off ball, and that's where he really shines at a lot of times as well. When you look at the fact when he goes to score in the paint, he's decisive in what he likes to do as well. In that, you can't really score over him either on the defensive side of the ball. So that nice versatility there. I don't know if he'll ever be like a 20 and 10 player at the NBA level, but he can definitely be a career 15 and 10, 15 and 11 with a block and a half per game or something like that. When you look at his collegiate career, 2.1 blocks per game. So he has the ability to bring in some rim protection. I look at him kind of like what Walker Kessler was as well in his draft class, right? He's somebody who can come in, he's going to be able to rebound, block shots, and defend in pick and rolls right away, and those are things. He's also a smart player. If you have a point guard there with him, which we do in Kobe White and Io, who do a lot of the ball handling, they're going to be able to find him on pick and rolls. His basketball IQ is excellent as well. He has great instincts on top of everything. That's why he is able to get the block shots that he's able to get, things like that, and he understands how to use his size to get penetration and get to the rim as well. So it's really good when it comes down to it. Also, as a defender, especially at the center position, one of the things you look for in the modern NBA game is somebody who can cover up the mistakes of your teammate, especially in like pick and roll defense. This is where Vooch kind of lacks at. Or if a defender gets beat on the perimeter, he has really great instincts to be a weak side defender and backline defender as well that can really, if your guard gets beat, he's going to be able to be there and make that decision quick enough to deter them from getting to the rim. And that's really what I like about him as well. Also, really solid rim runner as well. He'll get to the rim if you kind of play a little bit more of an up-tempo game. Not the best speed, right? But again, you look at that. And that is one of the biggest weaknesses from Donovan Clingan. He's a big guy. He's more mobile than like a Zack Edey, who has even more size than him. And kind of the players at his size, he's going to be more mobile than that. But he's not a great athlete at all. He's not really explosive. So, the kind of fear there that he's going to maybe not be able to guard as well in pick and roll with more spacing and quicker players, it's there, right? And he kind of sometimes isn't as aggressive with getting shots that I would like to take. And he takes sometimes a long time to use that gather on putbacks and things like that I think can maybe affect him a little bit at the NBA level. So that's one thing that you got to look at with him as well. Really good rebounding. He's going to get his own misses, kind of like what Andre Drummond does here. Sometimes much like with Drummond, you want to see him kind of take that ball, get it back to your guard, run some offense. He's going to go back for putbacks a lot of times, but sometimes because he's kind of slower in those times, it can allow defenders to kind of get back in good position on him. But he's going to also have to learn some post moves, right? Solid, his jump shots, working on it, so maybe he can extend that range a little bit out, not 3-point range, but a little bit more out to the mid-range to kind of add some spacing for your team. But other than that, Donovan Clingan is a really good prospect for the Bulls. I like his positives. I like and the weaknesses there are going to be some things that with the right coaching staff, maybe you can work out of that. So, look for that with Donovan Clingan. The next prospect we're going to talk about is Tyler Smith, a 6'11", 215-pound power forward with some center upside, played with the G League Unite last season, and his averages last season for that Ignite team, 13.7 points per game, only 5.1 rebounds per game, 1.3 assists per game as well. He shot the ball 47% from the field and 36% from three-point range. And that is kind of one of the biggest pluses of Tyler Smith in his game, is that he is the modern day power forward, right? He has huge potential when it comes down to it. Really big rated recruit coming out of high school, ended up going to the Ignite, things like that. Solid, well built, has that long frame, can guard multiple positions with it, and his upside as a 3-point shooter is one of the things that adds so much to his game, because he is going to have that ability to stretch the floor. Very confident in his 3-point shot as well. He can shoot off the dribble as well, which is something you don't see a lot with kind of bigs and things like that. He has really good handles. I wouldn't say guard type handles, but he does have enough handles to where he's definitely a modern type big. His ability to space the floor, his ability to play above the rim, because he can do that as well. He has a lot of strengths in that, but there are still some concerns with that. Defensively, Tyler Smith just isn't right there right now defensively. And I think it's more of an IQ thing. He sometimes looks completely lost on the defensive side of the ball, and that's a big concern, especially for, at your big position. You want your bigs to be wiry, be able to do those type of things. And so he doesn't, in pick and rolls as well. It's not that, again, I think this is a confidence thing with Tyler Smith, but we can get to that when we get kind of the more specific videos. And sometimes in pick and roll defense, it's like he thinks a second too long, and by then the guard is past him and he doesn't necessarily move his feet good enough. He has good feet speed. I think it's just an IQ thing as well. And at the rim, sometimes if he's not dunking, if he's not using his long, wiry frame or getting off pick and rolls and things like that, he kind of struggles when he's already at the rim of where to score at. And contact can definitely be a problem for him. 215 pounds, maybe, adding some size to that over the course of his NBA career, which over the first 2 years, he's going to add 10, 12, 15 pounds of muscle. Maybe that can really help him as well. 43% layup attempts at the rim. That's according to Synergy. That's where you start getting a little concerned as a big man, right? Is if you can't finish at the rim, if you're not getting the ball from your point guard, that's where you kind of run into a little bit of problems there. Now, and while he also projects to be a good shooter as well, like that's the thing that you have to ask your biggest question from him is his ability to shoot the three ball, his kind of struggles sometimes in the mid-range, which I do think he can overcome that as well. Is that going to be enough for you when you're looking at his offensive side of the ball? Because again, defensively is where you're kind of looking for him to round out. It will really be a kind of different pick for the Bulls. The Bulls with Patrick Williams, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, and even Ayo Dosunmu really picked players where their defense was kind of the things that you looked at. Tyler Smith would be a different case of that. His offense and shooting is further ahead than his defense, but he still has those raw intangibles that you look at him and say, I can still see this kid turning into a solid enough defender potentially. And so that's where you got to ask your questions there when it comes to a player like Tyler Smith is, the questions marks around him. And as well as when you look at players that have come from the Ignite, they haven't always had the best rookie years either, but with AK and Eversley, with the player development department that we have here, the big question they'll have to ask themselves about Tyler Smith is how much of the negatives of Tyler Smith's game do you feel like you can cover up with players that you have now here? And then also on top of all of that, how much of that do you think you can develop out of him with your player development department and your coaching? And that's what you have to ask there. All right, next up, the prospect that I want to cover is Kel'el Ware. This is one of my favorite guys in this draft. Now, with all these guys, and I should have said this at the top of the show, is that they can fluctuate. If you're looking at mocks, he can go anywhere. All of these guys are going anywhere from like 8 all the way down to somewhere in the 20s. So there's a big chance that a lot of these guys are going to be on the board for the Chicago Bulls, but there's also a chance that some of them could be off the board. And Kel'el Ware is one of those guys where he's a perfect example that it really depends on his draft combine and how teams personally rank him and where his potential is. Last year in college basketball, 16 points per game, basically 15.9, 9.9 rebounds, so basically average a double-double, and 1.5 assists on 58% shooting from the field. Also, almost 2 blocks per game did Kel'el Ware have last season. And the benefit with him as well, 42% from 3 his sophomore year in college, taking only 1.5 3-pointers per game. And so he can stretch the floor, but again, he's not a player that's looking necessarily to hang around the 3-point line, and he understands his limitations there. That's what I really like about Kel'el Ware. Kel'el Ware, honestly, is another one of my favorite prospects in this draft. The size, the length, the fact that he shrinks the floor, he covers a lot of ground. Whereas with Tyler Smith, he doesn't really, you worry about him in pick and roll defense, things like that. Listen, Kel'el Ware runs the floor. He's a great athlete. He understands how the timing on blocks as well. The second jump is well with him, extremely good. He's a lob threat immediately. He can run with the players that we have here as well for the Chicago Bulls, and he's not fearful of establishing his post position both offensively and defensively as well. He averaged 8.2 points per game on 56.3% shooting from the field, and 15.7 points per game overall as well. Like, he gets his paints in the paint. He's not afraid to do that. Now, he's a good defender. He has the shot timing that we talked about before. Some of the weaknesses with him as well is that he needs to add some strength, right? 230 pounds at 7 feet. You need to add, I would say if he can add ideally about, again, 10, 15 pounds of muscle or good weight, I think it's going to really help him to match up for the size and athleticism. And even if he does lose a little bit of his athleticism, with adding that weight, he still has more than enough where he's still going to be really good. Understanding how to pass out of double teams is something that you also have to look at. Now, how much is Kel'el Ware going to be double teamed at the NBA level? That remains to be seen. But in college, he didn't always show the best recognition of passing out of double teams. And with his ability to be athletic, get to the rim, how physical he was, he drew a lot of double teams, but didn't always understand how to make a pass out of it. He's a good passer. Make no mistake about it. It's just the identifying it out of double teams so that you have to worry about. Doesn't necessarily put the ball on the floor as good. He doesn't really have the best handles. So, again, you're kind of looking at a lot of like point guards to help create for him. But again, the foul trouble as well for him has been something that kind of earlier in his college career, kind of later last season, he started working on some of that. So that's where you really look at it for. But Kel'el Ware is a really good prospect in this draft. And I think that if you're going upside with also an ability to contribute now, that's kind of where I would like the Bulls to sit at. When you look at Kel'el Ware, he offers that. He's going to be able to rebound for you right away. You don't have to worry about rebounding. He's also going to be able to block shots for you right away. He's a good defender. He's a smart player basketball IQ-wise. He just, as well as a lot of the players that you're going to find in every draft, has things that he definitely needs to work on. And that's going to come, right? The NBA physicality, I will not be surprised at all. And especially when you know Bulls fans, if the physicality in the NBA gets to him a little bit when he initially starts getting minutes. And some Bulls fans are going to call him soft. And that's just because he's going to take time to adjust. He's a very physical player, but the physicality that he's used to dealing with is not NBA physicality. So I would not be surprised if it's a bit of a learning curve for him initially there, but I think he's going to be a player that you don't really have to worry about long term. I think he's going to work it out. And I think that Kel'el Ware, the fact that some mocks have him going as low as like 22nd, I'm telling you right now, Kel'el Ware is going to be better than that. I would not be surprised if he's better than that in his rookie year. But this is a guy who can contribute now. But the biggest part of him and the best part of his game is going to be years 2, years 3, after he's able to really kind of understand what he needs to adjust to physicality-wise. Khil Weare is going to be a damn good player in this NBA, and I really like him. One of my favorite prospects at the center position by far for the Chicago Bulls is Kel'el Ware. Love the guy, love his motor. To me, I look at him as kind of like a young, like the way that Tyson Chandler had to get his points initially, especially when we went over to New Orleans with Chris Paul. That's going to be kind of what Kel'el Ware has to do, but he has the ability to shoot more. He's going to have a mid-range shot. He's going to have a three-point shot. And so if you believe in that potential and you look at him, I think that Kel'el Ware may end up, and I'm saying may, I would not be surprised at all if Kel'el Ware ends up the best center coming out of this draft. That's just my personal opinion on that one. All right, let's get into the next player that I want to cover, and that's Kyle Filipowski. Now, this is a guy who I've been talking about a lot here, basically since I even started kind of touching on draft prospects and stuff like that. The thing about Kyle Filipowski that you're going to see, especially in these highlights, is his ball handling. This dude damn near has the finesse of a guard at the center position, and that's what separates Kyle Filipowski and makes him such a good prospect at the NBA level for the modern NBA. 7 feet, 248 pounds, averaged 16.4 points per game, 8.3 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and he upped his blocks. When you look at his freshman year, only less than a block per game. Last season for Duke, over a block and a half per game did he average. He's starting to understand that timing as well. But the thing about him, the mobility by him, this is a guy who other centers are going to have trouble guarding him because of his ability to dribble, his ability to start his offense from the three-point line at times. He is a run and jump athlete. Absolutely. He's going to have to prove that he can defend. The pick and roll defense is going to be something that I'm going to be interested in, and also defending in space, right? He has really good defensive fundamentals and potential there. And how that rounds out for him, I think, is going to be the biggest thing telling for his NBA career. But he has point forward skills. Again, I'm not trying to compare it to like a Jokic or anything like that, but I would not be surprised at all if Kyle Filipowski, on whatever team he ends up going to, he ends up taking over some of the half-court duties, especially if you have a point guard that is more of a scorer than a true traditional pass-first point guard, which the league is going to anyway. I love what he does. I love how he can space the floor. I love all of this stuff. Like, Kyle Filipowski can go from the lottery to the middle of the first round, and that's right where the Bulls are going to be at, right? So some of the negatives about Kyle Filipowski is that true back-to-the-basket scoring near the rim. He doesn't really have that yet. When he faces really big strength or length, he has some issues there. But I think that's going to be something that Kyle Filipowski works out in his game over time. He's a smart basketball player, so I'm not worried about that. But turnovers as well are things for him because he does dribble out in the open floor. Sometimes he can get a little bit too loose for that. That can lead to turnovers. And if you want to be that point forward, which he does have the potential to be, you really want to round out that part of your game as well. But Kyle Filipowski is a guy as well. Him and Khil Weare are probably two of my favorite as far as kind of the more modern day big. If you're just going kind of a more traditional big with some versatility, I really do like Donovan Clingan as well. But Khil Weare, Kyle Filipowski are way more modern style center positions that are center players that you're looking at going forward in the NBA and kind of where the NBA is going. And Kyle Filipowski, like I said, the finesse that he has. This is a play. His game is just smooth, right? And yeah, as a center, you're kind of looking for more. You want more physicality, and that's going to be something that he doesn't shy away from physicality. He just doesn't handle the physicality as best right now. But I do think that that's something that can work out for him over time. So Kyle Filipowski, definitely high on my draft board as well for the Chicago Bulls. Now, I said we were going to cover 5 prospects. And the 5th one that we got to cover is one that I know my brother Corn, some other people that I really respect, Ross, from, the formerly of their Tourist fan club. That's not him anymore, Ross Sports now. But he's a guy that, he brought up Zack Edey. And Zack Edey is going to be a player that I'm sure the Bulls are going to work out. You look at the raw stats, over 25 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and 62% shooting. He also is a really good defender. He's a smart player, right? 1.7 blocks per game is what he averaged for his career. Averaged over 2 blocks per game the last 2 years of his college career. This guy can just outright. He's a smart basketball player, and he's big. And he has size, and he's smart. He's a really smart basketball player. But the problems that I have with Zack Edey at the next level, it really comes down to how much is that defense going to translate. I've talked about this a lot. Zack Edey is a player that really benefits from the college game because of the lack of spacing in the college game. The floor is much smaller than what it is in the NBA. So he's able to cover more ground, and his slow foot speed doesn't necessarily negatively impact him as much at the college game just because of the things that because of the lack of spacing and lack of speed sometimes. The speed that he's going to face at the NBA level, the spacing that he's going to face at the NBA level, and kind of his slow foot speed, I just don't see him being as effective as a pick and roll or switchable a defender like he kind of was in college. Now, as far as just guarding big man in the paint, one-on-one, on-man defense, he's going to be solid in that because he's strong, he's smart. Yeah, he's a little bit slow, but I think he'll get the timing eventually. But the problem with Zack Edey is that he's also slow offensively. And while he was able to be physical and dominant at the college game, we've seen before at the NBA level, that does not always translate one for one. When you're working with more mobile bigs and more nimble bigs that are kind of quicker, I just worry that Zack Edey is going to get stripped a lot on that offensive side of the ball, even with his strength. Now, I do think that Zack Edey, he's not going to be necessarily be a bust. I don't know if Zack Edey is going to stick around in the NBA for 5+ years or anything like that. But for a team that takes Zack Edey, if you were looking to kind of play a more old school style, it would work. And the reason why I don't like him as much for the Bulls is that we've seen the statistics prove it. This is a better team when we play faster. And because of that, I just don't see it. I don't see him working with this team. I think that's trying to fit something. Again, he's slower than Vooch right now. And so if you're somebody that complains about Vooch slowing down the offense, Zack Edey would do that even more, and then you'll be attached to that for longer. And again, as that degrades the teams figure him out, that's where you start running into some problems with smart passer as well. When you look at Zack Edey, he doesn't do he's not getting a whole lot of assists. He's not doing point forward type things, but he understands when and where to get the ball when he doesn't have an opportunity to score himself. I just don't see it for this team specifically. But hey, maybe I'm wrong on that one. You guys can let me know what you think down below. But that's kind of the top 5 center prospects for the Chicago Bulls. Of course, Alexander Sarr, things like that. Doesn't seem like he's going to fall. We'll talk about some of the other positions going forward, and that leads me to how I want to finish the show. A lot of Bulls fans are kind of focused right now on the center position, and I've already seen some people that would be upset if the Bulls went a different position. And here's what I'm going to say. In this type of draft, it's not necessarily bad if the Bulls don't go position of need, because this is such a draft where there's not a lot of superstar projected talent. Doesn't mean that somebody won't turn out to be that. But I think ultimately it goes back to, if you see somebody that you think can turn into a star, regardless of the position, if it is a wing, which is the position that we'll be covering tomorrow, is wings, because that's kind of where a lot of other mocks have the Bulls potentially going, is the wing position. But if you do go if that ends up striking on the upside, then I don't necessarily see that as a negative, but we'll see what happens with that. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.